The first thing I wanted to ask you is I went back and I listened to your radio program from November 17th, where you were talking about Reverend Warnock. And I noticed that none of the callers, at least the ones you took calls from, were from Georgia. And in the end, this is ultimately an issue for the 7.7 million registered voters of Georgia. So can you tell me, what is your particular interest in this runoff election?
Well, I don't generally take interest in local senatorial elections, but this is for the control of the Senate. And I'm a liberal Democrat, and I do think that the Republicans' Senate stole a seat from the Supreme Court from Merrick Garland. And I don't think the Republicans in the Senate applied an equal standard to the Garland nomination as to the most recent nomination. And as somebody who cares deeply about the Supreme Court, my predisposition, obviously, is to support a candidate who will assure control of the Senate by the Democrats. On the other hand, I'm strongly pro-Israel, and I believe that American support for Israel is good for America, it's good for world peace, and is good for Israel. And I'm deeply concerned about the Reverend Warnock's positions that he took in 2017, 18, 19. And I'm suspicious of what I call convenient candidacy conversions. And so I'm skeptical about what the Reverend Warnock's real views are on Israel, although I've heard from all sides. I've heard from many leaders of the Jewish community that they're very supportive of Warnock and they think he'll be very supportive of Israel, but I remain a skeptic.
So let me talk about that part of the Jewish community. Reverend Warnock is particularly close with Rabbi Peter Berg at the Temple, which is the longtime leading Reform congregation. He has a number of well-timed friends in the Jewish community, a few hundred of whom signed a newspaper advertisement on his behalf. And they will tell you that he is pro-Israel. He is opposed to the BDS movement, that he supports the Memorandum of Understanding that the Obama administration signed with Israel, and that he's attended the AIPAC conference in Washington, accompanied by Rabbi Berg. And Rabbi Berg, when I spoke to him for a piece that I wrote in early November, felt that a lot of what was being said about Reverend Warnock was misrepresenting, and he used the word deceitful. He was saying snippets from sermons were being taken out of context of the larger whole. So what's your feeling when you have a significant part of the Jewish community in Atlanta and in Georgia that does support Reverend Warnock?
Well, I take very seriously what the rabbi said. I take even more seriously what my friend Deborah Lipstadt wrote in today's Jewish Daily Forward. They support Reverend Warnock completely. But the rabbi is misleading you when he says that those of us, and I'm a liberal Democrat, those of us who have quoted Reverend Warnock have quoted him out of context. We have not quoted him out of context. He went to Israel. He signed a statement. The statement is a broad, broad statement containing many, many, many very strongly anti-Israel sentiments. If you read that statement as a whole, it is very anti-Israel. Sure, there are snippets in his speeches, but the snippets are significant. When he says that Israel shoots down unarmed Palestinians like birds of prey, that is not out of context. What is happening is people like the rabbi, who are very supportive of Warnock, they are taking out of context the criticisms. My criticism doesn't come from the right. It doesn't come from Republicans. It doesn't come from people who oppose the two-state solution. I am a moderate centrist supporter of Israel who supports the two-state solution. I support Palestinian rights. But what the Reverend Warnock has said at the time he said it represented a deeply bigoted and anti-Israel point of view. He may have changed, but Rabbi, please don't tell me that I've read it out of context. I've read it in context, and you're distorting his statements by saying that they're out of context. If you want to defend him, saying he's done tshuva, which the Hebrew word is repentance, and he's changed his mind, I accept that. but you lose your credibility with me completely, Rabbi, when you say that the snippets are out of context and that he was never anti-Israel and never represented anti-Israel views. That is a categorical untruth. Sorry, let's be truthful. He was anti-Israel. Now he says he's pro-Israel. We have a right to judge him both on what he said in the past, what he said now, and what he will say mostly in the future. That's what I'm most concerned about. Will he join the claque of anti-Israel extremists in Congress? I hope not, especially since he only serves for 2 years and has to run for re-election. I think he will be a good senator in the next 2 years. And in the end, if I were in Georgia, I might vote for him. But I will not vote for him based on the misrepresentations that the rabbi and others have put forward and the Jewish Daily Forward has put forward. He was an anti-Israel zealot when he signed on to that statement, when he made those statements. He has changed, perhaps. That's the issue. But don't distort what he said in the past. Rabbi, you have an obligation to tell the truth about who he was if you're going to tell us who he is and who he will be. And if you don't tell us the truth about who he was, we're not going to believe you about who he is now and who he will be.
Let me drop back from a question I was going to ask and move to another one. I want to get a definition from you. What does it mean to be pro-Israel?
Well, let me first tell you what it means to be anti-Israel. To be anti-Israel means that you apply a double standard, that you say that Israel shoots down Palestinians like birds of prey without seeing that Israel is trying to defend itself. You condemn the security barrier without saying a word in that statement about why the security barrier was built and how it has saved thousands of lives. You apply a different standard. You use analogies like apartheid, which are false. That's anti-Israel. And Warnock has done every one of those things. To be pro-Israel is very broad. You can be pro-Israel and be anti-Netanyahu. You can be pro-Israel, and I call myself pro-Israel, pro-Palestine. I want to see Palestinian rights. I want to see a two-state solution. I want to see peace. I want to see a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem. I want to see a contiguous Palestinian state that's secure. I want to see a successful Palestinian state. So I'm pro-Israel, I'm pro-Palestine. And I'm not talking about whether he's pro-Israel. I'm talking about whether he was anti-Israel. He was anti-Israel. Maybe he's not now, but we have to debate this issue honestly and not allow Democrat-Republican zealotry to enter into the conversation.
Well, to that point, one of the things that Reverend Warnock has said and his supporters have said is that they fear, and it is happening from my perspective covering this, that Israel and anti-Semitism, but primarily Israel, is being used as a wedge issue to divide the Jewish community among itself, divide the Jewish community from the African-American community, with which there's a fairly rich and historic texture over a matter of decades.
Right.
And, you know, as a generation perhaps before yours might have said, is any of this good for the Jews? And you have to ask whether all of this divisive talk about one candidate might do more damage within the community than is realized at the time.
No, I think we are a divided Jewish community, and that's a good thing. We should be divided. If we were not divided over the Reverend Warnock, we would be asleep at the wheel. We should be divided. Look, if you're a liberal Democrat who doesn't care much about Israel, of course you vote for Warnock. There's no doubt about it. If you're a conservative Republican who cares deeply about Israel, of course you vote against Warnock. But if you're a deeply liberal person who cares deeply about Israel, you should be divided. And the Jewish community should be divided. This is not an artificial division. This is a real division. You've heard the expression, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. Why do you think there should be uniform views? First of all, the Reform Jewish community is very different from the Orthodox Jewish community. The Reform Jewish community puts civil liberties values and other values and left-wing values often over pro-Israel values. Remember, the Reform Jewish community was against the establishment of Israel. Originally in 1948, the German Jews, many of the Jews of the South, were anti-Zionists. They've come around. But the
Right, after
support for Israel,
1967, yes.
right, but the support for Israel varies with what denomination you are within the Jewish community. So of course there's going to be division. This candidacy hasn't created division. It has only revealed existing divisions. And I think that's a healthy thing for the Jewish community. We shouldn't ever be taken for granted.
What we have here is two races, of course, and the
Right.
Democrats have to win both
Right.
in order to split the Senate and put the vice president in the chair with a deciding vote. The other Democratic candidate, John Ossoff, is Jewish,
Right.
Has family in Israel, talks emotionally about that, and from the campaign stuff, vouches for the pro-Israel bona fides of Reverend Warnock.
Mhm.
Now, Reverend Warnock's opponent, interim Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler, has been quite animate about the issues of that statement that was signed after his 2019 trip, the sermon he delivered in 2018,
right,
his 2008 defense and attempt to explain Reverend Wright. The question that's left in the Jewish community is, who's a Jew to believe? Because you have people of good faith and credential on both ends of this.
I have an answer.
You had the letter the other day from the Coalition for Jewish Values, Orthodox rabbis, one of whom signed was Rabbi Feldman from Beth Jacob here in Atlanta. So the Jewish community is, if you're not a partisan on either side, you're left to go, which Jew do I believe?
Well, the answer is no one. You don't believe anyone. You believe yourself. You read everything. Every person in Georgia, and particularly every Jew, should read the entire statement that he made coming back from Israel, should read the entire sermon from beginning to end, should read his statements about the Reverend Wright, and should read his more recent statement in which he says he supports Israel, should read everything he said. Don't listen to rabbis, to leaders. Make up your own mind, because nobody is objective here. There are many people who put control of the House, of the Senate rather, over support for Israel. There are some who put support for Israel over control of the Senate. Everybody has different priorities, and their priorities shouldn't govern your vote. Your vote should be determined by your priorities, your interests, your interpretation of the letter. One thing that upsets me is that the Reverend Warnock has never gone up in there and stated, as a man, as he should do, I was wrong in 2019 signing that statement. I was wrong in saying that Israel does this. He's not done that. He has said what candidates are expected to say when you're running for election. And as I said, convenient candidacy conversions are not necessarily to be trusted. They may turn out to be true. We've seen conversions like that. We've seen people turn from being anti-Israel to pro-Israel, and the opposite. So every Georgian voter has to judge, has to look Reverend Warnock in the eye and say, am I voting for the Reverend Warnock who's made recent statements? Is it still in his heart, the statements he made previously? Why hasn't he explicitly renounced the previous statements? I have to tell you, as I sit here now, I don't know who I would vote for if I were a voter in Georgia, but I would be conflicted. And any Jewish Democrat who's not conflicted doesn't understand nuance or has been misinformed.
How much do you know, and I realize you're not here, but how much do you know about the candidate he's running against, Kelly Loeffler, in terms of her views, not just on Israel, but in general? How aware are you of her candidacy?
Well, I've been following everything. She owns a WNBA basketball team. My son is the general counsel of the WNBA. He's known her for a long time. I've listened to her statements. I was not blown away by her debate. I'm not here to defend Loeffler. I'm not here to support her. I'm here to tell every voter to look hard at Warnock's record, to read it for yourself, to make your own decisions, to ask him hard questions, maybe write to the campaign. Say, why have you not renounced your prior statements? Are you prepared now to renounce your prior statements? These are the hard questions. This, to me, is not an issue of Loeffler versus Warnock. For me, it's solely an issue as to whether, as a strong liberal Democrat supporter of Israel, if I lived in Georgia, would I cast my vote for somebody who has made statements like that and then has made positive statements? That's a complex question. And Deborah Lipstadt, in her, and she's a friend of mine, and I love her, and she's terrific, said the issue is clear. The issue is anything but clear. It is not clear. It is complex, it is confusing, and it ought to be, and everybody ought to make up their own mind without regard to partisan considerations, look hard at the issue, and make your decision as to whether this is the man you want to be representing you in the United States Senate. If you decide the answer is yes, God bless you.
Well, as you know, the Reformed Jewish community, and by Reform, let's just put in Reconstructionist, conservative, secular, humanist, however you want to define, tends to not rank Israel among its top 4 or 5 issues when it goes to vote.
That's important to know.
And in the Orthodox community, Israel ranks as a higher voting priority. So for a Jewish voter who might have Israel as their 5th, 6th, 7th consideration, but Reverend Warnock's positions on other issues, call them domestic social issues, they are in agreement. What kind of advice would you give to them if they find, in general, Israel aside, he's the candidate they want to support?
Well, I'm the perfect person to ask. I am a secular Jew. I attend an Orthodox synagogue. I identify, my daughter was bat mitzvahed as a conservative. I love all Jews. I love all people, but I love all Jews. For me, Israel ranks very high. If Israel ranks 5th or 6th, you don't have an issue. Don't come and ask me about it. If Israel ranks 5th or 6th, don't. I'm not the person to ask. I support a woman's right to choose. I support gay marriage. I support gun control. I support equitable taxation. I support health care for as many people as possible. I support reducing student loans. I buy the entire liberal agenda. I don't buy the radical agenda. I am a strong opponent of AOC and the Squad and all of those extreme radicals, but I'm a traditional liberal Democrat. But I do place Israel pretty high up. If I only thought about Israel, I would be a Republican, but I can't be a Republican because I support a woman's right to choose and gay rights and all of those issues. So I'm the right person to ask if you put Israel high on the agenda. If you don't, if Israel is way, way, way down in the agenda, I'm not the right person to ask. Ask somebody who associates with you. But if you put Israel high on the agenda, as I do, you ought to be conflicted.
Let me, if I can, with a few minutes that we have here, I want to ask you one on a somewhat unrelated, but everything election related is together. If the President of the United States called you and said, "What should I do?" Is it time, a month away, basically, is it time for the president to concede the election, recognize that former Vice President Biden has won, and begin a more active transition, as the Constitution states, between his administration next? What should he be doing, as opposed to these court challenges and constant public social media chatter?
Let me answer it in 2 ways: what he should do and what he has the right to do. I'll start with the right. He has the right not to concede the election. Every president, every loser, every candidate, every person who thinks they won has the right not to concede the election. What he should do is he should acknowledge that the president-elect is Joe Biden. He should attend the inauguration. He should participate in the peaceful transfer. He should encourage all the agencies to work on transitions. If he wants to announce that he's going to run for re-election in 2024, that's his prerogative. And if he doesn't want to concede the election, Andrew Jackson didn't concede the election. He fought for 4 years against John Quincy Adams, called it the corrupt bargain, and then he got elected. That wasn't un-American to do that. The biggest problem was the transition. And once the administration agreed to cooperate, now today there's some news reports that maybe they're not cooperating as much with the Defense Department. That would be too bad. So my advice to the president would be acknowledge who the next president is going to be, attend the inauguration, But if he asked me as a lawyer what his rights were under the Constitution, I would say your First Amendment rights are like anybody else's. You have a right not to concede. You have a right to announce your reelection, and you have a right not to go to the inauguration, but you should go to the inauguration, and you should acknowledge that on January 20th, the president of the United States will be Joe Biden. By the way, I've known Joe Biden for more than 40 years. He is a very good man. I think he will be good for Israel. Perhaps not as strong as President Trump. President Trump deserves enormous praise for what he did with Jerusalem, the Golan Heights. Today, Jared Kushner and Avi Berkowitz are in Morocco, the Sudan. He deserves an enormous amount of credit for that. And as a person who voted for Hillary Clinton, I'm going to give him credit for that. As a person who voted for Barack Obama, I'm going to condemn Barack Obama for having engineered the UN Security Council resolution, which declared the Western Wall, the access roads to Hebrew University, Hadassah Hospital, and the Jewish Quarter to be flagrantly illegally occupied territory. I'm going to condemn the person I voted for, and I'm going to praise the person I voted against when they do the right thing. That's what it means to be kind of bipartisan supporter of America.
Just out of curiosity, has the President of the United States asked for your advice on this election?
No.
Aftermath? No.
No.
Then let me move to the last thing I wanted to ask you. However you call it, a gulf, a divide, a rift, we live in an extremely polarized country, not just politically, culturally, socially, in numerous ways. What is Professor Dershowitz's proposal to begin, not to do it, but just to begin a healing of the rift, a bridging of the divide in this country? What do you think should be done?
What Alan Dershowitz does is writes books about it. So I wrote just now a book called The Case for Liberalism in an Age of Extremism, or Why I Left the Left but Couldn't Join the Right. I've written a book now just last week, Against Cancel Culture, the newest attack on free speech, due process, and meritocracy. I am trying very hard to build a centrist constituency. I have a podcast every day called The Dersh Show, in which I reject the extremes of both the right and the left and call for a more centrist America. And I'm trying very hard to bring people together and to eliminate this polarity. Look, I have a group of friends I grew up with in Brooklyn. We're eight of us. We grew up together, went to the same yeshiva, went to the same high school, went to the same Brooklyn College. We are so deeply divided over these issues that our emails have begun to, for the first time in the 82 years we've known each other, we have gotten shrill with each other. We still love each other and we still write to each other, but it's become shrill and it's sometimes a little hard to talk. When one of my friends made a Nazi analogy or a Weimar Germany analogy, I got very angry. I don't think making analogies to Nazi Germany and America is the right way of remembering the tragedy of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. So I try to eschew extremism and move more to the center. That's all I can do is write books. I give advice. I've advised 6 presidents. I don't give my advice based on partisanship. If Joe Biden asked me for my advice on the Middle East, I'll give it to him. President Trump asked me for advice on the Middle East, I gave it to him. Bill Clinton asked me for advice. Barack Obama did, and George W. Bush did. And I will offer advice, and my advice will be centrist advice. Sometimes I'm not asked because they don't want to hear my centrist advice, but they're going to get it through my books and op-eds anyway.
Professor Dershowitz, thank you. I appreciate you taking the time. Are
Great
you are you quarantined there or just
No.
staying away?
No, we're just staying away. We do all my work here. My son is here with me, my daughter, my wife. We're walking. I walk my 6-7 miles every day. I write my 300 words every day. Fortunately, I live the kind of life that I can live up here on Martha's Vineyard. As soon as I get vaccinated, we will move down to New York and Florida, where we usually spend our winters, and look forward to seeing people again and becoming more involved in the person-to-person life of our country.
I look forward to that as well. I've pretty much been quarantined in my home office here since March. thank you for taking the time. I appreciate you making yourself available for this.
Thank you.
Take care.